at the massive, mind-boggling Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas a couple of months ago. There, amidst the drones and self-driving cars and wall-sized TV screens was a Bluetooth button you stick on your Tupperware, which will track how long until your food expires. Know what's in your fridge and how long it's been there from anywhere, the inventors crowed, seeking venture capital. They tell us that the average Americans throw away 40% of the food they buy, wasting $2,000 annually, and 2/3 of the time, it's because it's forgotten. I wince when my bride tosses that unopened plastic deli counter container of chicken salad that was hidden behind something in the bottom shelf because its use-by date has passed. Does that sound familiar? It's worse. Not only does that moment squander the retail cost of the item tossed, think about all the energy consumed producing it, including raising the ill-fated chicken, and the expense of disposing it, and tons of other food we waste, while many go hungry. So first things first. The United States Department of Agriculture explains that use by, best if used by, or quality assurance is the last date the product is likely to be at peak flavor and quality. It doesn't mean food is unsafe after that date and you can always freeze it. A sell-by or pull date is an indication to the retailer of the last date on which a product should be sold, and it takes into account time for the food to be stored and used at home. You should be able to use milk, for example, for up to about 7 days after the sell-by date. And when you see an expiration date, it's the last date on which something should be eaten or used. Eggs are an exception. You should be able to eat them safely for the next 3 to 5 weeks. Shopping more efficiently sure will help, but here's a wider angle shot on food waste. What happens to what the supermarket doesn't end up selling? And the bread the waiter brought, but you didn't eat. Add it all up, that $2,000 a year is the tip of the iceberg when you consider how we could save or make better use of the land and the water and the labor and the energy committed to producing, processing, transporting, preparing, and storing what we don't eat, then disposing of it. Food waste is the single largest component in municipal landfills, making them the third largest source belching methane into the environment. How can we turn all this around? Let's ask Brian Lipinski, the World Resources Institute, whose work revolves around 6 critical goals: climate, energy, food, forests, water, and sustainable cities. Brian, we're going to keep you in the Rolodex. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Did I get all that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. My main area of focus is food waste, though.
How many in the USA aren't getting enough to eat?
So according to Feeding America, a food bank nonprofit in the US, about 1 in 8 people in the US struggle with hunger. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily never getting enough to eat, but it's a state of not necessarily knowing where your next meal is coming from. And so that's troubling enough as it is. But when we're also throwing away up to 40% of the food that we produce each year, there's really an opportunity there to reduce that inefficiency, which has great environmental gains and economic gains, but also help people in need.
I want to show a chart that I'm sure you've got memorized by now. This is the EPA's food recovery hierarchy, and it shows 5 different steps. How are we skipping from number 1, reduce the food volume of surplus food generated, all the way to number 5, landfill incineration, I should say, clearly labeled as the last resort? What's missing are those steps in between: feed hungry people, feed animals, industrial uses, composting. What can we do to feed landfills less and feed people more?
That's a really great question, and the hierarchy is a really great guide in terms of telling us, the absolute best thing is feed people. The next best thing is industrial uses and compost. And as you say, landfill really should be the last resort. The thing that makes reducing food waste a really tricky issue is that different things need to happen at different stages of the food supply chain. So, your solutions at the consumer level are going to be very different from your solutions for a retailer or a farmer. So you mentioned date labels. That's actually one area where we're starting to make some progress, in that the 2 major trade groups for grocery manufacturers and retailers last year announced a voluntary initiative among major retailers to simplify date labels so that you're only ever going to see one date label on a package.
Gotcha.
So either a best before for something that doesn't necessarily spoil, something like a pasta or a cracker where, you know, before a certain date it'll be a little crisper, a little fresher, but it doesn't go bad necessarily. And then a use by date for things that actually where there is a food safety component, something where you could actually be sick from it.
Right.
So that's one area that's going to help consumers. Another area with retailers and restaurants is actually a law that we already have on the books. It's called the Good Samaritan Law, and it was passed in 1996, way back then. And what it does is it protects donors of food from liability if something goes wrong, if someone's sick or something from it, except in cases of gross negligence. But in a lot of cases, companies are still reluctant to donate that food because, you know, the bad PR or something that comes along with that, even if your liability is limited. So those laws could be strengthened or revamped, or even there might need to be more education out there because a lot of retailers still will cite liability as a reason that they don't want to donate excess food.
Yeah, well, it gets some good PR if it does work out.
Yeah, yeah, very true.
Hey, the skeptic in me wonders if this labeling is a bit of planned obsolescence. Is that a conspiracy theorist thinking, or by simplifying it, will we solve this throwing it away unnecessarily thing?
Well, I don't think it'll solve it, but it is something that, in terms of estimates of how much food is wasted in the home, about 20% of it is attributed to confusion over date labels. So I don't think it's necessarily a case of planned obsolescence. I just think that the date labels that we have now are meant to be more of a communication method between the manufacturer and the retailer. And what's ended up happening is that the consumer is seeing all those dates and taking that as important information for them, which is understandable. You know, you pull something out of your fridge and you see that the use by date was a week ago, you're gonna play it better safe than sorry. So it's understandable. It's just something where there needs to be clearer communication to the consumer.
Well, when I get home, I'm going to eat the chicken salad anyway. Hey, Brian Lipinski, World Resources Institute, please come again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Here's how another country reduced its food waste by 25% in just 5 years. Joining us from Copenhagen, Denmark, is Kasper Nielsen, co-founder of the app Your Local. Velkommen.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It is estimated that here in the USA, the average person wastes $2,000 a year in food that gets thrown away. Now, check my math. I think that's about 12,000 kroner. What is your estimate of the average per person food waste there?
It would be approximately the same, maybe a little bit lower. As we in Denmark have a lot of awareness around food waste and also have some quite effective initiatives going, but it's still a huge problem. In Denmark alone, we're wasting 700,000 tons of food each year, and that's in a small country with only 5 million people. In Europe, we're wasting 78 million tons of food yearly. So even though a lot has been done and are being, it's still a very significant problem.
How did Denmark accomplish what you have accomplished so far, reducing food waste as dramatically as you have?
Well, first and foremost, we have a very powerful movement that started in Denmark about 10 years ago called the Stop Wasting Food movement. It was started by a very charismatic and energetic woman called Selina Juhl, and she's really been enabled to inspire both politicians and NGOs and the whole retail industry and end consumers like me to really address this problem, this issue. So she's been very important in driving this agenda, and on the heels of that, it has created a lot of new, interesting solutions where we are just one of part of that.
Obviously,
so that has definitely had an impact.
Yeah. Obviously, raising consciousness that way is the first step, but actually getting people to do something is what intrigues me about your app, Your Local. Tell us how the app works.
Yeah. Well, really, we made a digital platform where we made it really easy for the shops to to make offers on surplus food just before it expires at the end of the day. And we enabled customers to follow the local shop, so they get a notification when the shop makes an offer. And then they can just buy the product through the app and go pick it up at the end of the day. So basically, the shop can increase their revenue, and the customer can save some money. And of course, we can prevent a lot of food waste. So it's basically a win-win-win. So it's a way of using technology to balancing surplus and demand at the exact right time.
And your app is not just in use in Denmark, is it?
We are just in use in Denmark right now, but we're to expand at the moment internationally.
Based on what has worked there, what advice would you offer us here in the USA about cutting food waste?
First of all, it's about interpreting it as a real problem, creating the awareness. That's the first step. But the one thing that really has effect is when it comes to the solutions. Easy to use solutions that can involve customers, regular customers like me. You will always have the 5–10% of these really dedicated, motivated people that wants to do something, but you really don't move the problem until you are able to involve the 90% and make it really easy for them to participate in the fight against food waste. That's what we've tried with our app. There are other ways to do it, and another whole new amount of solutions coming up. But that's the make it easy for the average consumer to make a difference.
Well, I think what you've done is real smart, putting it on the smartphone, because it's right there in people's pockets. And I look forward to this app coming here in the USA. Thank you, Kasper Nielsen in Copenhagen, for joining The Big Picture.
We're on our way. You're welcome. Thanks a lot.
Your smartphone already knows. But here's a quick reminder for humans who are watching in the USA, unless you're in Arizona or Hawaii. Reset your clock and replace your smoke detector batteries on Sunday. When we spring ahead, it's not an hour later, it's an hour later. It's an hour closer to baseball in just 3 weeks. And that's The Big Picture. If you missed any part of this week's show, or if you want to share it, you can, where you'll find all our shows at youtube.com/thebigpictureRT. And if you see us somewhere else, you can also watch RT America on DirecTV channel 321 or Dish channel 280. I'm Holland Cooke in Washington. Until next week, question more.